Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we answer the question, 401k or pension, what's the best choice for retirement? This question is one that confuses and kind of throws us off a little bit. We have two main choices when it comes to how we fund our retirement. One is our 401k, or it's going to be a defined contribution plan. That's normally what most people are going to see: 401k, 403, TSP plans, these different ones. And then you have your defined benefit plans, which is more like a pension. And the way I remember them is the contribution is what percentage you put in, and then your benefit is what amount you get out. And so your defined benefit plan is a pension plan, which is a very fancy way of just talking about an annuity, an income for life. They've been around for thousands of years, and you are able to decide between the two of these. And we'll go through a few things that I would ask myself to determine which one makes the most sense for me in my retirement. And so today, what I'll do is I will share my whiteboard with you all, and we'll go through some of the things that I would ask myself, as well as the pros and the cons for you to be able to decide what makes the most sense for you in your retirement. So, first and foremost, when it comes to deciding between the two, let's start with some of the reasons I would prefer a 401k. What are some of the benefits to a 401k? So for most of us, if we are talking about a 401k, one of the main things that we are looking for, and we say, all right, what is the reason I like a 401k? And for most people, you want to be able to have a little bit more control over your investments. And because you get control of your investments in your 401k, most of us are like, I like that. I can choose the investments, the options that I'm looking for inside of my pension plan. The company gets to choose it. And I don't know if they make the best decisions when it comes to investment. And so I have to kind of deal with that. You would also be interested if you're looking at a 401k, you also like the idea that you have an employer match. And so this isn't always the case, but a lot of the time you have an employer match. If that is something that is of interest to you, where you put in $1,000 and then you immediately get 100% return on your investment, you have another $1,000 in the account, you have 100% match for the first 3 to 4% most of the time. I think that that's normally going to be something that people like as well. Another benefit that I do think we appreciate, but we don't always think about is that it's portable. I can take the money inside of my 401k wherever I go. And so with the money I put in, depending on the match, they normally have a vesting period. So you normally have to be there somewhere between 3 to 5 years to be able to take the amount that your employer matches. But the amount that you put in, that is your money and you get to take it with you. You get to roll it over either into an IRA or your new employer. You can roll it into that fund. You can take the money out depending on your age, is whether you have to pay taxes or a penalty, but that is your money and you get to take it with you when you leave. And many times when we're considering making a change in employment opportunities, the fact that we get to take our 401k with us sometimes ends up being a really big positive when we're deciding whether we want to leave or stay. You find that a lot of people with pensions, they end up staying at that employer because it's not something they can take with them. The fourth benefit to a 401k is normally going to be you have higher contribution limits. So we're really talking about whether or not you have the ability to place this money inside of an IRA. So if you had a pension and then you kind of opened your own IRA, you can only place $7,000, $8,000 in it each year, and then it indexes with inflation. Versus I can put 23,500 inside of my 401k, and then depending on the type of 401k structure I have, whether it's a solo 401k, a Roth 401k, you can get up to $69,000 that you can place inside of it each year, where you contribute as the employee and the employer. And so if you want to really jumpstart your retirement investment, having the money inside of a 401k tends to make a lot of sense. And then our fifth and final benefit to our 401k contributions is we normally have the ability to grow our money. If we make the right investment choices, we can exponentially grow our money. There are no limits, there are no caps. It's our money. And many times when you're talking about taking that money and giving it to your heirs and the next generation and things like that, if it's inside of a 401k, you have those choices. Now, we could talk about different things like the tax bomb and different things that we have to also consider. But the fact that you have the money and the money is yours to give to whoever you want as a beneficiary, you actually have the money. And because you have the money, you can invest it in a way that allows it to grow. Now, of course, that leads us very well into the cons. So if those are going to be the pros of our 401k, then if we're going to talk about the cons of our 401k, then naturally the first one is going to be you take the risk. If you have the ability to grow the money, then that means you have the ability to lose the money. If you have control of the investments, that means the risk of those choices are on you. That you've seen in the first quarter that we had $6 trillion that was lost from the stock market. Now we're off to a very nice start in the second quarter. But if you opened your 401k dashboard or opened your statement, you saw that you're missing some money from your investment accounts. You have the risk. And that is always going to be the other side of the coin of growth. If you want the growth, then you probably have the risk. If you don't want the risk, then you probably don't have the growth. It does require discipline. And discipline means that we're not making emotional investing decisions because you could have logged into your 401k in the first quarter, saw that you had lost 10, 20, 30% of your portfolio, and then just took everything out. You could have made huge changes to your investment strategy based off of what you were seeing in the stock market on any given day. And then you found out the next week that that strategy would not have been the right one, that the one you had was the best one. And it's really big on removing emotions from investing. That if you want to be able to invest your own money, you're going to have to put a strategy in place that allows you to remove the emotion and you just look for the cues. As soon as A happens, I do B. As soon as C happens, I do D. I'm not worrying about anything people are saying. I'm not worrying about any of the emotions and the fear. I am a disciplined long term investor and I'm going to follow the plan through and through. Number three, and the one that most people are probably thinking about when you're comparing a 401k to a pension, is you have no guarantees of the income. So, no income for life. We're not going to be able to have the lifetime income. We don't get that. Now, it's possible based on my investments and the growth, but as far as it just being a guarantee and I don't have to think about it, as long as the company exists, I'm going to receive a paycheck. No, we don't have that type of a guarantee in our income. And it's also very important that we keep track of the fees. A lot of the times, the fees they get us in a couple of places. Sometimes it's on the investments that they choose, where it's a very actively traded. I remember meeting with a client and I was going through the 401k, and it literally said that it was like a turnover ratio of like 90%. It's crazy. And for those that don't know, your turnover ratio is how often the stocks in the portfolio are traded. And so it's not uncommon for an active portfolio to have maybe 10, 20, even 30%. But to be upwards of 70, 80, 90, you then start looking at the fees and you see why they were turning over the stock so often, because they were getting paid every time. They had a commission and they had certain transaction fees that were tied to those transactions. And so those fees were just killing their overall investments. The investments weren't that bad. It was just when you count the fee ate away at it a lot. Many times you can put a portfolio together where you have some passive funds, but you put them together in a way that makes it almost a little bit more of an active portfolio. Now, there are many things to consider whether or not you should have all of it passive or whether you should have a portion of it passive and they should have a portion of it active. There are lots of things to consider, but it starts with just keeping track of the fees. If you have a 401k and these other ones, they tend to have higher fees with fewer options as far as customization is concerned. And that's one of those things that isn't discussed as much as it probably should be when you're really talking about the impact of fees on your investments. And there are lots of studies that talk about just the smallest of fees, how it can completely ruin someone's retirement over a long period of time. And our fifth and final con is you have to manage the withdrawals. You have to put the withdrawal strategy in place and you grow the funds. After that, you get to decide, how do I want to take the money out of my account? And there are so many ways to do it. You do the 4% rule, which is, hey, I take out 4% of what I have. Generally speaking, my investments are going to return 4% on average. That means if I take out 4%, I increase with inflation each year, then I should be able to ensure that I don't run out of money. Or you can look at having the income based withdrawal strategy. And all the income based withdrawal strategy is, I have investments with things like a dividend and rental income and interest income. And I take the income that my investments generate and I live off of that. And I never touch the principal of my properties or my stocks. And so that is another investment strategy. You guys know that I'm often talking about the three bucket strategy. I like the three bucket strategy for most people because it gives me the ability to have a portion of my portfolio still actively growing in the stock market. And so, what the three bucket strategy will look like is I would have my conservative, I would have my moderate, and then I would have my aggressive bucket. And then I may have 20% in my portfolio here, and this is going to be 1 to 2 years of cash. And you can also have like CDs in here and money market accounts. All these would be considered the equivalent of cash. In my moderate bucket, I could have 30% in a moderate bucket, and I'm going to be focused on income here. And so when you're looking at income, you could have a bond, you could have your annuities, you could have a balanced portfolio. And when we're looking at balanced mutual funds, normally that ends up working because you already have 50% of bonds and 50% of stocks. And the normally blue chip stocks, so the risk inside of these is a little bit less than your more aggressive investments. And you can have that. And then normally this is going to be somewhere in that 3 to 8 years range. And then you still have your aggressive, which could be like your 10 plus. And then your aggressive is 50% of your portfolio. And you can have that 50% that would cover your business. It could be your stocks, and it could be your real estate. I mean, really, you could have your commodities in here. And so the way this normally works is you would say, all right, over a span of 10 years, whenever I'm having good times in the aggressive, I will sell my aggressive and I will buy my moderate. And so I get all my income based, and then I will have 3 to 8 years for that. And then as I spend down my cash, because that's what I'm living off of, I will find opportunities over the span of 2 years to be able to sell my income based bucket, and I will have more cash and I have my cash equivalent. And so I just have 2 years now to be able to replenish this. I could wait for a crazy market or economic downturn to finish and have 2 years to wait before I can sell anything in this one. I have 10 years to wait before I can sell anything in this one. And that gives me the flexibility to be able to maintain my investment, to still be relatively aggressive, to ensure that we have the return that we need to increase the likelihood that we don't run out of money. And so you have these different choices when it comes to you managing it, and you have to choose that. And a lot of people aren't that excited to make those different choices. And so that would be the pros and the cons of your 401k. We'll move on to your pension plan now. So inside of your pension plan, we'll go over the pros and the cons as well. So we'll be able to kind of maintain this. Naturally, number one in everyone's heart when you're choosing a pension is you like the idea of having a guaranteed income. That is the reason that almost anyone who chooses the pension is going to choose the pension. You just want to have the money the rest of your life. Naturally, we do have to consider whether the employer will be there because the employer is the one giving us the pension. But we get a pension the rest of our life. We wake up, the checks in the mail are deposited in the account because we're probably not mailing the checks anymore, but it's inside of your account. And then number two is, of course, this naturally gives you less stress. We talked about some of the things that we have to make decisions on inside of your 401k. You have to choose the investments, and you have to manage the growth. You have to manage the risk to maintain the discipline of the investment choices and sticking to that plan. Then you also have to manage the withdrawal strategy and just keep an eye on the fees, right? So you're like, I got to do a lot of things. Inside of the pension, there's a lot less stress. You place the money in, and the employer has all of those other things that we showed. They're managing that for you. They're managing your withdrawal strategy. They're managing the investment choices. You don't have to worry about any of those things. And as long as the company exists, you don't have to worry about outliving your money. You're going to receive that money. Number three is that people do like that it also normally includes a spousal benefit. And so if I have a significant other and I want to make sure that they have the income, we normally get to choose. Sometimes it's called a sweetheart deal. And the way it normally works is you normally have three choices. So choice number one is normally going to be a single life, and that's just your life. So as long as you live, you receive the money, and you will normally receive the largest amount for this. So we'll just say $1,500 a month, right? We'll just simply just make it nice and simple. And option number two is normally going to be a period certain. And so period certain is maybe 10 years. It could be 20 years, but it's going to be a certain number of time that no matter what happens to me, that you promise to make the payments. And because the risk isn't all on you, normally they will lower this option a little bit. They'll say, hey, look, if something happens to you in year one, you're taking some of the risk with us. So we'll give you a higher return because you could be out of gas. You could have put in $100,000, then got in one check, something happened, and then we keep the rest of the money, right? That's true. They said, but option number two, you have less of the risk. No matter what happens to you, and even no matter what happens to your spouse, someone is going to receive this money for 10, 20 years. So we're going to lower the amount because there's a little bit more risk on our side. And then option number three is normally going to be what we would call the couples, right? Or joint life. And so sometimes they call them the couple, sometimes they call it joint life, sometimes they call them the sweetheart deal. And it's just basically saying no matter what happens to me, and my spouse will receive it for the rest of their life too. And no matter how long either of us live, we're going to receive this amount for the rest of both of our life. And because you have limited the risk even more, normally this option has a smaller amount as well. So the risk is going to reduce how much your payout is. But at least it's just one less thing to really think about. Your spouse is covered. You don't have to think about that at all. Number four is there's no ties to the market. And when I say the market, we're not talking about it's not investing in stocks because it probably is. But what we're saying is when the market goes down, you receive the same check. Like whatever the market is doing, it doesn't matter. You're going to receive your check no matter what. And so you don't have to even worry about the market when it comes to receiving your income. And then the fifth benefit, and it depends, is whether or not you have a COLA adjustment. So the COLA is your cost of living adjustment. And so we call it COLA. And so anytime you have these adjustments, that means that the amount that you receive actually goes up with inflation, which is super important. And it depends on when you started for most of the people. So in Florida, we have the Florida retirement system, and it has a cost of living adjustment if you started working in the state before 2012. So if you started after 2012, they remove the cost of living adjustment. So your income is not going up anymore with inflation. And that's important because inflation about every 20 years causes the amount of money that you need to purchase the same lifestyle to double. And so what I'm saying is that if you need $50,000 right now to live your lifestyle, in 20 years, you would need $100,000 to live the same lifestyle. And we can kind of look around and you can see around the price of eggs, the price of gas, price of plane tickets, the price of cars, houses, the price of everything just kind of goes up over time. And all we're saying is about every 2 decades, it has gone up so much that the price of the items have doubled. And that's what it's been on average. That's a 3% inflation. So if you believe inflation will be even higher, then that is also something you'd want to have to consider. Naturally, we're talking about some of the environments with the tariffs and whether some companies will increase their prices to offset their cost. That is going to be something that would also have to be considered. As I mentioned, if you're before 2011, then you're fine. You have a pension that goes up with inflation. If you're after 2011, 2012, then you're in trouble. You don't have that cost of living adjustment. And that means that the amount of purchasing power that you have will have to be offset by other investments, or you won't be able to maintain your lifestyle if it's only your pension that you live off of. And so that does lead us into the cons, right? So we're looking at the cons. Number one is you lack flexibility. And you know that flexibility is kind of big on my list, but you're committed to the plan. And whether that means that I need to work there for 10, 20, 30 years to be able to have the best version of the pension, then you're committed to that plan. If you're talking about the employer and the decisions that they make, you're committed to their plan as well. You generally speaking don't have access to the large lump sum of money. So if you had surgery, then you had your investments in a 401k, then you would just go in your 401k and take out more money that you're paid for the surgery. But if your money is inside of your pension, you don't have that flexibility to just call them up and say, hey, you know what? I need $20,000 for this surgery. You're just going to receive that check the rest of your life. So you have to have a little bit of foresight in your planning where maybe you have a portion of it that just goes towards your emergency medical fund. But you just want to be able to keep in mind that you don't get to just take out any extra. It's whatever the set amount is, and that's what you get to receive. Number two is you may lose if you leave early. So in Florida, I would just use the Florida retirement system. So in Florida, it is set where you have to be there currently 8 years. So if you were in 2011 and before, it used to be 5 years. And then if you're now after 2012 and on, it is 8 years. And then if you're not there for 8 years, you don't get access to the pension. Every employer is a little bit different. So it depends. We don't really know. But what I will say is 5 years is pretty common, but you'll just want to look at your benefit package or you'll call your benefit counselor, your HR department, and just ask them, hey, how many years to be able to access my pension to where even if I leave, I do get some of my pension. Now, of course, the amount varies, so it won't be as large. And what I'll do is I'll pull up my calculator real quick and I'll go over here. So basically, what happens when you're calculating your pension for most of you, it is going to be your years times your multiplier times some sort of salary. And so it could depend. They could take the best 5 years or they could take the best 10 years. But most of the time, it's going to be around whatever the amount of years you need is, right? Like if you only need 5 years, then they probably take the best 5 years. That's how the FRS system is. If you have to say 8 years, then you have to take the best 8 years. And that's the difference between our 2012 and after and our 2011 and before. And so an example of this would basically be in Florida, we have a pension multiplier of 1.6%. And so 1.6% is our multiplier. So if I was to be somewhere for 20 years, and then I times it by 1.6, that would give me 32, which would be the percentage of your salary that you get as your pension. So if your pension is $50,000, and then you times it by 32%, and then if you multiply that by a salary of 50K, that means your pension would be 16K. That is 32% of $50,000, right? Now, if you were to stay 30 years and you multiplied 30 times 1.6, that would give you 48. So you'll be able to keep 48% of your salary, which would end up being 24,000 bucks, right? Almost half of it. So you're able to keep half of it. If you were someone who was only there for 10 years, 10 times 1.6 is 16% of your salary. And if you have the $50,000, and that would only be $8,000 is what you get to receive every single year. And so, right, that's less than 1,000 a month. So you can see that the amount differs depending on the multiplier. So we have a special class where their pension multiplier is 3%. So they're able to get a higher percentage of the salary much quicker. And so it depends on what your multiplier is and then how many years that you're in service. And that will tell you what you can expect to receive as your pension. And so depending on how many years you're in, you can see how it makes a big difference. The difference between $8,000, $16,000, and $24,000 is a decade. And so the question becomes, is it worth me working an extra 10 years to get the 8,000? Well, it really depends. What age am I going to be when I work the extra 10 years? Was I going to do it anyways? Did I enjoy the work that I have? What does it look like as far as my whole retirement plan and the income that I need? Do I have cost of living adjustments inside of it? There's a lot of pieces that go into being able to answer that question. And it really does depend on each individual. The third con is there is no inheritance value, which means that when this is over, whether you chose the single life, then that's it. However much money you put in there, it's not like it gets to go on to the next generation anyway. There's no generational wealth value. If you chose a period certain, again, after that 10, 20 years, that's it. However much money was in there, it's gone. And if you chose a couple after you and your spouse pass, again, there's no generational wealth value. The money is gone. It goes back into the whole pool of the pension fund. And so that is something that if you are big on generational wealth, if you want to make sure you have certain things set aside, then it's going to have to require you to have either a plan outside of the pension or you would choose the 401k option because then you have the access to the money. You get to choose what to do with it at the different times. Now, what I have seen is some people do is they will basically choose the joint survivorship option and they won't choose their spouse. They'll choose maybe their grandchild. And so that ends up giving the grandchild the income stream for the rest of their life. Well, now, obviously, insurance companies are very mindful of this. So that would significantly drop the benefits. So, for example, if you and your spouse were both around 60, you'd probably receive that 1,000. If one of you was like 15, it would probably drop to, and obviously I don't know exactly, but it'd probably drop to like 300 bucks. Like it would drop significantly to account for the fact that you put in a certain amount and then this other person who's very young is going to receive this amount the rest of their life. But I have seen that as well. But then again, you can only choose one. So that one would still be the same issue is that if you have more than one, but if you only have one, at least that is something to consider. And then the next one is it may not keep up with inflation. We talked about the cost of living adjustments, but what if it doesn't happen? So if it has no COLA, like the Florida retirement system, if you're 2012 and later, you have no COLA adjustment. And what we're saying is that if you look at the cost of items over a span of time, cost goes up a lot. And if your pension doesn't keep up with it, you know that that money is not going to maintain your lifestyle in 10 years from now. And you can think no different than I know, like my dad, we would always tell the story about going to the corner store and he would spend a nickel, he would get a soda and like a bag of candy or something. I'd be like, you can't do anything with a nickel. And I know even for me, when I would buy video games as a kid, I would go to Walmart, I put it on layaway, and then I would spend for my allowance every single week, and I'll pay it off in a month or two. And the game was probably like 25, $30. And then there was always this full thing where if you waited long enough, the price of the item would go down. So sometimes I would wait so that I can get it for a lower price because I was just fine with that. Well, that game's like $100. Price of the game has doubled, and the price doesn't seem to go down. No matter what month you go, it seems to be $100. And you can really keep going with all these things. On the other end, it sometimes works in our benefit, right? So an example of something working for your benefit would be like your mortgage payment. You have a 30-year mortgage payment and you pay like, I don't know, let's say $1,500 a month. You can get a car payment for $1,000 a month now. But $1,500 was reasonable for a mortgage 15 years ago. But car payment may have been $250 a month. Right now, mortgage might be closer to $2,500 a month. And then your car payment is closer to $1,000 a month. And so you can see that the price of things go up. Well, that means that if you just keep your same house, your mortgage becomes a much smaller percentage of your budget, which where $1,500 used to be a large percentage of your budget, that was your mortgage. Well, in this environment, $1,500 is someone's car payment. And in the future, it'll be even more expensive. So you'll be sitting there with this $1,500 payment, and you'll be like, this is great. Where the price of everything has gone up, but my mortgage has not gone up. It has stayed the same. And so that would be one where it works for you. But at the same time, if your pension was at $1,500 and that was enough to cover a mortgage 15 years ago, and that was a fair, reasonable amount, well, now the $1,500 could barely cover a car payment. And then one that's not really a con of the pension, but just something to consider is you do have to keep in mind that there is not many places offering them. So basically, what happened was the government was looking at Enron and these other companies in the 90s, and they were like, hey, they're not funding the pensions the right way. And so then our government was like, I got a great idea. How about we require companies to have a certain amount of money that's set aside to cover the pension? If you want to see how that works out, just look at the post office. They have a huge pension requirement that is basically the reason that they lose money every single year. You can just look it up and read it if you'd be interested in it. Well, if I'm a private company, and that is what would happen to me, that it would literally bankrupt me like the US Postal Service. Most companies just said, well, in that case, I'm not going to offer a pension. And that's what happened. So where you went from the past where maybe half 60% of companies offer pensions to immediately companies were like, I'm just going to pay you out, turn it into a 401k, and we're going to get rid of this pension because I have to hold so much money in cash that it makes it hard for me to grow my company. And so company after company after company started removing their pension. And now in the private sector, I mean, I think it's less than, I know it's less than 20%, but I feel like it's really close to 10%, where there's only maybe 10% of private sector companies that offer a pension. So when it comes to you deciding, it depends on your own unique life situation. If you don't have heirs and you find yourself stressed about investing and withdrawal and making choices, then the pension is probably the right choice for you. If you're someone who wants the money because you like the flexibility of being able to say, I just want to take a real big fancy trip this year and I'm okay just taking out an extra $20,000. Then if you want that flexibility, then you would go with a 401k or defined contribution plan. But sometimes what we'll do is we will try to find a way to choose both because sometimes both ends up being a viable option. And so I can give you a quick example, right? So if you're able to say, I will have a pension and my pension will cover some of my normal expenses. And so I will have my pension plan and I'll have my pension cover my needs. So food, water, electricity, housing. And then I'll have my other investments. I'll just add investments, cover my wants. And so that could be the trip, the lifestyle, the eating out, the fancy things, all of the fun stuff we would have in retirement. And so if you have the pension, so if your pension covers, I don't know, let's say like $1,000 a month, and then you have your social security, and let's say that that covers another 1,500 a month. Well, that would have you already with $2,500 every single month, and that would be close to $30,000 a year. And so then depending on your lifestyle, your other investments would then cover all of your wants. And so you can look at those asset classes that I'm always talking about, right? We already know that 65% of self-made millionaires have at least three streams. So that would be the goal. We already have a pension and we have Social Security, whether you want to combine them into one or count them as two streams, you have them available. And then we would say, all right, well, I'm going to invest in rentals, or I'm going to invest in the stock market, or I'm going to purchase a business. And if you would make any one of these three choices, that would be the rest of your money. And so you can invest this money in a brokerage account and whatever that looks like. So you have your pension that's already going in, maybe that's 3%. And then you have another 10 to 15% of your investments that are going towards one of these three streams. And then you will find yourself in retirement with multiple streams of income. They have a lot more flexibility and control, and you're able to have the money for emergency. You also have the safety and that think about it portion of your investments. And then you're able to really enjoy yourself in retirement. And you're able to really go through this strategy and make that work for you. And so hopefully what you're saying is it's about making your money work with your lifestyle goals and not against them. And if you're someone who's trying to figure out what to do with your pension or your 401k, you don't have to guess. Join me this Wednesday for a live free workshop. I'll go over the 5 risks to a wealthy retirement and 3 frameworks that I use to ensure that you get rid of those risks immediately. Then I'll put a link in the show notes, or you can go to obsidianwisdom.com and then you click on I want a worry-free retirement, and it'll take you where you can then sign up. It's only limited to the first 100. That's just how many fit in the Zoom room. And I'll go over those strategies. So you'll also get access to the Wealthy Retirement Planner for free, and you'll see how to gain access to that as well. As always, I'm Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. I'll thank you for our time together. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.